So today we'll talk about two architects, Bruno Taut and Carlo Rainaldi. Let's start with Bruno Taut. We'll read a little bit about him. So Bruno Julius Florian Taut was born on the 4th of May, 1880. So 142 years ago, on this very day, was a renowned German architect, urban planner, and author. He was active during the Weimar period and is known for his theoretical works as well as his building designs. This was the man, a very interesting architect and a very important German architect. He was in love with the Japanese culture. Of course, he was not the only one to love the Japanese culture. Important architects loved Japanese culture, including Frank Lloyd Wright, who also had an incredible collection of Japanese woodcuts. So let's learn a little bit more about this interesting architect. I read a few days ago a fragment of his manifesto, Down with Seriacism. I'm not going to read it again, but at least 3 people here do know, because I read from it about his attack on concepts, and you can see clearly on the right where he says, "Oh, our concepts, space, home, style. Ooh, how these concepts stink. Destroy them, put an end to them, let nothing remain," and so on. He goes on. It's an important topic, actually, because very important architects still use the word concept. And here is another important architect, Bruno Taut, who writes violently against concept and against the word concept, which he finds pretentious. And in many ways, it is pretentious, because it is simplistically depicting a project or even reality in excessively, dry terms, the reasons terms, the brain's terms. The heart doesn't work with concepts. It's the brain that works with concepts. But the project is not born only from the brain, or it shouldn't be born only from the brain. But it's true, it's difficult to replace this word. What other word would you use? Like idea, conception, which is still related to concept. It's difficult. Sometimes it's difficult to find a replacement for this word, concept. But in the case of Bruno Taut, he was at war not just with the word concept, but also with the pretentiousness of academia, with the seriousness. He was himself a very serious architect and an accomplished architect, but he was against seriousism. And you see there in the title, Down with Seriousism. And I think what he wrote is very valid today as well. And it will probably always be valid. Anyway, like he writes, important, this damned habit of acting. Actually, myself, I use the word important to talk about important architects. Tombstone and cemetery facades in front of junk shops and old clothing stores. Smash the shell-lined Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian columns. Demolish the pin beds or heads. Down with the respectability of sandstone and plate glass, in fragments with the rubbish of marble and precious wood, to the garbage heap with all that junk. He was wild then, but I think he was questing for truth, for a truth which is less glamorous, and he was searching for that tomorrow. You see at the bottom, in the distance shines our tomorrow. Well, our tomorrow, is the dream of a different world, is a dream for a change. And that change often doesn't arrive very easily. But again, you see where in his attack on concepts, how violent he is, chase away their schools, destroy them, put an end to them, let nothing remain, chase away their schools, let the professional Whigs fly, will play catch with them, blast, let the dusty, matted, gummed up world of concepts, ideologies, and systems feel our cold north wind, death to the concept lies or lies. Death to everything stuffy, death to everything called title, dignity, authority, down with everything serious. This was an avant-garde architect, young and tumultuous, who wanted truth and not facades, not authority, not titles and so-called dignity, dignity that was not deserved. So he also wrote other things, most architects of some value express themselves also not just through drawings, but also through writing, through building, and so on. Like, for example, he wrote, art, that is one single thing when it exists. Today, there is no art. Well, he wrote this at the beginning of the 20th century. The various disruptive tendencies can find their way back to a single unity only under the wings of a new architecture, so that every individual discipline will play its part in building. Then there will be no frontiers between the applied arts and sculpture or painting. Everything will be one thing, architecture, the direct carrier of the spiritual forces, molder of the sensibilities of the general public, which today are slumbering and tomorrow will awake, is architecture. Only a complete revolution in the spiritual realm will create this architecture. But this revolution, this architecture will not come of themselves. Both must be willed. Today's architects must prepare the way for tomorrow's buildings. Their work on the future must receive public assistance to make it possible. You saw he used the word spiritual a few times. And also he implied the connection between sculpture, painting, and architecture, just like Walter Gropius in the Bauhaus Manifesto. And I don't think these architects didn't know what they were talking about. Look at this, again, provocative statement. The layman, the woman, and the child will lead the architect further than the inhibited specialist. Beautiful. In essence, he says that life in its raw truth is more important than the pretentious, so-called expert work of the specialist. I totally agree with Bruno Taut. Like Walter Gropius said, the specialist is the one who always repeats the same mistakes. But I would add, he wrote the inhibited specialist, but he could have very well written inhibited and inhibiting specialist. Unfortunately, most schools of architecture prepare specialists, specialists. Well, what is a specialist? Architects in their essence, they are generalists. They are not specialists. They are like conductors of an orchestra. They don't play a specific instrument, although they might. They bring together the instrumentalists, and then the architect is a coordinator of works. So when Bruno Taut says the layman, meaning the man on the street, the ordinary man, the common man, the woman and the child will lead the architect further than the specialist. Obviously, such a man would have had a hard time with authority and so on, because he was radical, wasn't he? Anyway, here you see kind of a text, again, some kind of a manifesto he wrote together with Gropius Taut. I don't know who the other person is. What did he write here? Are not we who are at the mercy of all devouring society, parasites in the fabric of a society that knows no architecture, wants no architecture, and therefore needs no architects? For we do not call it architecture to give a pleasant shape to 1,000 useful things, dwelling houses, offices, stations, markets, schools, water towers, gasometers, fire stations, factories, and the like. Our utility in these matters, by means of which we earn our living, has nothing to do with our profession, any more than any modern building has anything in common with Angkor Wat, the Alhambra, or the Dresden Zwinger. We talked about the Dresden Zwinger just the other day, you know, when we paid homage to Peppelmann, its architect. Again, you know, what he says and what he said, it's totally in contradiction with what most schools of architecture think it's worthy of the profession of being an architect. You know, he understands the spirit of architecture, and even Le Corbusier said the same thing when he said architecture is not a profession, it's a state of mind, it's a state of spirit. But this sounds too foggy or too lyrical or too poetical. In our profession, we cannot be creators today, but we are seekers and callers. We shall not cease seeking for that which later may crystallize out, and calling for companions who will go with us on the hard path, who know in deep humility that everything today is nothing but the very first light of dawn, and who prepare themselves in self-forgetful surrender for the rising of the new sun. We call upon all those who believe in the future. All strong longing for the future is architecture in the making. One day there will be a worldview, and then there will also be its sign, its crystal architecture. Then there will be no striving, no obsessive seeking for art in the life of various banalities. Then there will be one single art, and this art will shine into every nook and cranny. Until then, the utilitarian can be tolerable only if the architect bears within him a presentiment of this sun. It alone provides the measure of all things, strictly distinguishes the sacred from the secular, the great from the small, but it also lends to everything, everyday things, a shimmer of its radiance. And he, you know, these are of course exalted statements of a fervent and feverish mind. I will show now some pages from a beautiful book he published on Alpine architecture, which is expressionistic and exalted and mystical. He built also the famous glass pavilion at the exhibition in Köln, in Cologne, in 1940. Unfortunately, it was destroyed after a few months together with all the other buildings because the First World War started. But this is a very famous creation of Bruno Taut. And if only for this building, and he deserves a great position within the history of modern architecture. The glass pavilion by Bruno Taut, which he built at the Werkbund exhibition in Köln, in Cologne, in Germany. Now, these are, you know, modern recreations, either digital or I don't know how. This is an image of his proposal for the Chicago Tribune competition in 1922. So this year there will be the centennial of this exhibition, and I wrote the text for a possible competition, you know, for kind of a you know, metaphysical tower. If you are interested, I could send it to you. This is a housing complex he built in Berlin, In this, you recognize the horseshoe shape. Anyway, I wish I had the other presentation with me, but it's still, an imperfect homage, but still an homage. Because it's a little bit, as you see, not very, very organized, and I apologize. This is an interior of the glass pavilion that he built in Köln or Cologne, another one. So again, this building was built 118 years ago, in 1914. And it's still, in my opinion, strikingly, innovative, and I feel, because I know that it was born in 1914, but still has a level of, if I am to call it, modernity, which is appealing to us today as well. Well, this is not by him; it's by Sir Norman Foster. But somehow I saw that some parallels could be seen, both because of the exterior of the building. Of course, the tower by Foster is much taller, and so on, and it's not going to be easily destroyed. Another drawing from Alpine Architecture. You remember that I read about the sun. This is again the sun, the god sun, if I am to express myself in this way, is the an eternal symbol of of the infinite, and the primordial force that generates life. These are the drawings of the glass pavilion by Bruno Taut, and indeed it was although a small building, but not small in terms of quality and in terms of meaning. One of the most important buildings of modernity, actually, this glass pavilion, which does not exist any longer. What is interesting about this building is that it's based on the circle in plan, as you can see. So it could have been, it could have evoked some kind of classicism, but because of the section and the elevation, it's somehow there is a Gothic or Gothicist or even Islamic touch here that brings in the spiral. So the spiral is implicitly present in some kind of a conjunction with a circle. And I think he was able in these small buildings to bring together certain opposites, like classicism, romanticism. It's you have the circle, you have the spiral, you have the web, you have the spiral is present here rather explicitly. An interesting work, it escapes easy categorization. Now, these are, of course, contemporary drawings, but I think I trust them. They are correct. I remember drawing Levius did for the Epicyclarium, as he called it, kind of a temple lighthouse this in a way is something like this too, it's maybe some kind of a, glass temple for a god we don't know yet how to name or to call. It's Bruno Taut was a mystic. And although he had also very strong social concerns, and in a way he was also a social worker in the field of architecture. But this building shows something of a longing for something that is not exclusively of an utilitarian order. Interesting work. Bruno Taut in Cologne or Köln in Germany, 1914. There were other important architects, significant architects who contributed to that exhibition, like Van der Velde or Gropius himself. All the buildings were destroyed because the First World War started. Another page from Alpine Architecture. Truly, again, these are exalted and exalting drawings, watercolors. This man had the vision of some kind of a golden age. Another one, you see the presence of the sun, very, very powerful. What we see here is the example of the architect as a dreamer. I know that architects are discouraged to be dreamers by many schools of architecture, but in my opinion, the best architects are nothing else but dreamers. And some of them are able to bring to reality what we call the dream. Like this was built. Bruno Taut, the Glass Pavilion, 1914. Again, a page from Alpine Architecture. We saw this one, I don't understand. I'm going backwards here. I'm really sorry. This presentation is, I'm not proud of. The sun. Again, some kind of a Gothicist or Gothic longing for an architecture of exaltation. The plan of that housing complex in Berlin. Now, this thing, if it belonged to a horse, brings good luck in the public mythology. Maybe that's why he made it like this, to symbolize some kind of a lucky housing complex. Again, a page from Alpine Architecture. This presentation is terrible. I don't understand. I really don't understand. I think it was a sketch for the tower for the Chicago Tribune. His competition entry, he didn't win. Raymond Hood won the competition, but apparently the best work in the opinion of the critics was the one done by the Finnish architect Eliel Saarinen. He built many houses, blocks of flats, some smaller, some larger, not very tall, but he built a lot. All these things are done by him, actually. Everything you see here in red. So he was also an urban planner, not just an architect. I mean, he didn't design objects. He designed the whole you know, the whole site that we see here. In Berlin. Housing and People of Japan. He wrote this book by Bruno Taut. He lived for a while in Japan. And yes, he was very fond of Japan. Houses and People of Japan by Bruno Taut. Back to this. Now you see there is, you know, he was an avant-garde architect at that time, and actually he changed because from Japan, he went to Istanbul, to Turkey, where he was invited to teach. And there, I hope I have here images of the house he built for himself in Turkey. He was accused that, you know, he kind of got rid of his avant-garde stance and became more, in a way, more of a conformist architect, if you can believe it, because I just read, you know, what he wrote, and you would say impossible this man to be considered a conformist. Some even said, you know, usually people when they grow older, you know, they give up the radicalism of their young years and become more conformist. I don't know. Anyway, but what we see here, we see clearly a dreamer of other worlds and a mystic. An utopian. Bruno Taut. It is his birthday today. So in 1914, Bruno Taut built his glass pavilion at the Werkbund exhibition in Cologne. The phrase above the elevation drawing says in German, the Gothic cathedral is the prelude to glass architecture. Taut's building was meant to be an experience of light afforded by a combination of glass and skeletal metal structure. Now, of course, we had a lot of glass architecture for the past many years, and steel structure and so on. But still, this building in 1914 was revolutionary, and I would say in a way still is, because he was able. Of course, we have buildings by Calatrava, for example, and others, but this one, in its modesty, because it's not a big or arrogant building, is able to bring together, as I try to say, various characteristics that usually are not brought together. And I think this building is seminal for modern architecture. I mean, the very fact that he mentions the Gothic cathedral, and you see their Gothic dome, you know, it's translated here. The Gothic cathedral is the prelude to glass architecture. So there was a Gothic sensibility in him, a Gothic aspiration. Here is a view of the courtyard, the large courtyard of that housing complex with the horseshoe. This is a house he proposed. I don't know if he built it, a round house, as you can see, with a pole in the center, in a way, a very primal house, and interesting, actually. A very small house. You see, there is a desk there with a table with two chairs, And you have the bathroom and the little bedroom and the living room, which is, you know, it's really a small house. No, this is not, maybe this is a small bedroom, no, quite small for a child, let's say. Well, by the way of the triangular room, Adriana, that you said you were not allowed to make, well, what else is here? In fact, not only here, but also here.
Yes.
This is triangular. It's just that, you know, one side is curved, but it's a triangle, and here you have a triangular configuration as well. Bruno Taut, one of the important modern architects. The other floor, here we see the bathroom. So this is not triangular? Of course it's triangular. So there are on both floors clearly triangular rooms and not very large rooms. It's okay. Who you know, the dogmatic professors, you know, you cannot do a triangular room in plan. Why not? Why not? And not because Bruno Taut did it and others. But why not? Could the professor, because you cannot put furniture? Well, how come Bruno Taut was able to put furniture here? And you can see he did on both floors. You know, the timid functionalists who say you lose some space here, you lose a little bit of space here, they don't sit right. It's okay. You know, I mean, life doesn't use every square inch, you know, mathematically. There are small accidents, small inadvertencies. It's okay. It's okay. God, you know, these dogmatic little professors infesting the minds of students. I don't know what this is, but it is by Bruno Taut. I told you this presentation is actually, I'm very unhappy with myself. That is not, I don't understand. I have presentations, I presented, one is even displayed on YouTube on Bruno Taut. I hope it's not this one. I forgot which one I did. Anyway, so housing again by him, blocks of flats, very modest. These are not, you know, extravagant blocks of flats. Are more modest, you know, for you know, normal people, common people like me and others, you know. But a good architect employed his, you know, energy and work and talent to do them. And as you can see, color, yes, not white walls, even you know, opposite colors, red and green, you know, on two walls which meet at the corner. I remember what an important North American writer wrote, you know, where the two walls ask themselves, you know, now one wall tells another wall. I mean, no, the question is, what does a wall tell another wall in their discussion? You know, it's a question. What does the wall say to the other wall? And the answer is, meet you at the corner. Well, this is what is happening here, meeting at the corner. Okay. Blocks of flats. It's okay, but they are different. There is a difference. There is a difference. You know, there is a difference because there is a spirit here at work. It's the spirit of Bruno Taut. The buildings are modest, but even in their modesty, the buildings are by Bruno Taut, not by someone else. And they are rather sweet and rather almost vernacular, you know, if I can say something like this for a block of flats. And with something almost traditional. You look at the windows, the small windows, the almost square windows. I would say they are very sustainable. No, they don't use here a lot of glass, and I'm sure they are cozy and sweet. Anyway, we saw this one, the glass pavilion. This is the cover page of the book, Alpine Architecture. It happens that I have this book. I don't know where it is, but I do have it. When I purchased it was, I don't know, $10, $15. Now it's a few hundreds. It became very expensive. I don't know why, unless one is lucky to find it. It's a fine book, but it's not a, and even the publisher, Preston, is not a prestige. I mean, it's a commercial publisher. This book became immensely expensive. The last time I wanted to purchase it for someone, and it's a few $100s. Anyway, these are pages from the book, Alpine Architecture. We saw already some. Here is the man. I like Bruno Taut, a troubled man, I think. I mean, he's elegant, but still troubled. I like troubled people because I'm troubled too. We saw this. Well, we didn't see this page, but we saw already. I think you'll probably dream tonight or have some kind of, during the night, you'll have images of his glass pavilion popping up in your mind, in your imagination. Here is some kind of a, collage or rendering made in the present with the Cologne Cathedral. Well, it's much bigger actually, but maybe this is placed on some kind of a hill, imaginary or real, in Köln, in Cologne. 1914, when the terrible First World War started. And in not much later, the Second World War started. And now we have another war, humankind is never stopping. Blocks of flats, clouds passing by, Bruno Taut again. Bruno Taut and the Architecture of Activism. There is this book, and I like this title. I think architects should be militants, should be activists. It's important for architecture to stop, enslaving itself in the name of little lucrative jobs. It's important to fight for idealism, for ideas, for justice. Architects are too passive in general and too much accomplices of those in power. That's why even Louis Kahn, whom I admire and respect and even love, said, a painter can protest against the war by painting the wheels of the war machine square, but the architect has to make them round. And I would disagree with Louis Kahn. I think in the case of war, the architect should also make them square, not round, to sabotage war, to fight against the war. I don't know who these gentlemen are here. I don't really see Bruno Taut here, or maybe I don't see very well, which is also possible. Anyway, page from Alpine Architecture. I like this crystal architecture that he envisioned, usually on top of a hill. Imagine this was built. Some kind of a, new cathedral, the cathedral of the future. Now, this was done by me, not by Bruno Taut. I made one, I don't know why I included this here. It's, I don't know. Again, this presentation is troubled and I apologize. This was a large pastel drawing, which I did of a large series called the Egg Building, and egg-like it is, or it wanted to be. And this is the only picture I have, but I made about 10, 15 or 20. They are now in an attic in Sibiu in Transylvania. and I made them in the United States. That's it. I stop with this. I will show you now something else. Also for Bruno Taut. Just a second. I don't know what's going on here. Okay. I should read this. We already know about this. I will go quickly through a few images. I want to arrive at something else. Alpine Architecture, he published it in 1917. And we saw a few pages, now we see a few others. And then I'll show you an interesting project received to the competition, a house for Bruno Taut, which I launched a number of years ago. So I don't know if he wrote this, I will read it. This proposal may seem adventurous and even pretentious, but at the risk of being treated as immodest and utopian, it must be made at least once. It should be merely clarify in a concrete form the tendencies that encourage one to build high and should not be looked at as an end in itself, but rather as a suggestion that brings us closer to the realization of what was identified previously as to the fulfillment of further aims. I don't know what, yes, that's what he wrote. The ultimate is always quiet and empty. The cathedral was the container of all the souls that prayed in this way, and it will always remain empty and pure. It is dead. The ultimate task of architecture is to be quiet and absolutely turned away from all daily rituals for all time. This is what he wrote in 1919. It's hard to believe that he wrote this because, again, most schools of architecture teach exactly about the daily rituals. But it was his opinion that the ultimate task of architecture is to be quiet and absolutely turned away from all daily rituals for all time. But that's what he wrote, you know, by the way of his exalted, utopian, mystical Alpine architecture. And the First World War had a strong effect on Bruno Taut and his later architecture because he became a pacifist. The ideas that he had created in the Crystal Pavilion of 1914 would be framed in a deeper context, and they became in the starting point of the architecture during the next years. Taut claimed that architecture had to find an alternative to the war ideology of that time, and it had to be connected with mysticism, as he used to say, without religion, there is no true culture, no art. This statement was framed within the concept of Geist and Volk, spirit and people, where the Geist spirit was the vehicle through the personal aspirations of the man, were close of the creations of the God. This is really, I mean, we can talk the whole evening and several days and several nights about this, but I would agree with him. And in fact, so again, he said, without religion, there is no true culture and no art. Johann Huizinga said that you cannot have culture unless culture aspires towards some kind of metaphysics. Well, you know, between metaphysics and mysticism is not such a long distance. And again, what I almost said Tadawando, what Bruno Taut said, without religion, there is no true culture and no art. No art, he means without spirit, there is no true culture and no art. And this coincides with what great French sculptor Auguste Rodin said. He said that at the very beginning, religion and art were one, they were united. In fact, art was a form of worshiping God or the gods, a god. But then they became divorced, and he was the opinion, he thought, not more than the opinion, he believed that when art and religion became disjuncted, became divorced, they both died. And exactly the same thing was said by Ingmar Bergman, the great Swedish film director. Bergman said that actually the artists today, and we could include maybe even the architects, although the architects don't care any longer about spirit, but he didn't refer to the architects, he referred to the artists. He said the artists are like little ants that transport the skin of the dead snake, and because of there are so many, the ants, and they move, the skin of the dead snake appears to be alive, but it is actually dead. It's just the skin, the carcass. And he identified the artist with a little ant, and he considered himself one such little ant. Now, I mentioned Auguste Rodin, I mentioned Ingmar Bergman, we read about Bruno Taut. These were exceptional people, exceptional creators who took creation and creativity very, very seriously. And I think we should listen to what they said and what they thought, because most of the time we don't even think about, what is this nonsense? If there is no religion, there is no true culture. You see, this man also built housing complexes and social housing. And, it's not that he built only churches. In fact, he didn't build churches. But you can bring spirit to almost any kind of work. And it's important to think about spiritual matters. Now, in 1919, Taut published his book Manifesto, The City Crown, where from a rational approach, he established the basis of a new communal center, a secular space between the Gothic cathedral and the Asian temple. This is also interesting, and I didn't mention, indeed, in his work, there is some kind of, I infer this kind of meeting between the East and the West, or between the West and the East, the Gothic cathedral and the Asian temple. In these temples, the latest aim of architecture, its function, is devotion to beauty and a place for the spirit. Bruno Taut attempts to a futurist utopian where technology has to help to the guys, to the spirit. Shortly after publishing this book, Bruno Taut showed his new work, Alpine Architecture, where he designed his secular temples in a very creative sequence of drawings. Glass and steel are seen in Alpine architecture as elements that break away from the materialism of the period. One of the main targets of Taut was to get over the limitations of the materialism as part of his activism against rationalism. Glass was a synonym of the primitive purity and the paradigm of the innocence, an interior dream world that, instead of facing the ideological and social problems of the period, he enclosed in a crystal bubble. Drawings from that book, Alpine Architecture or Alpine Architecture. A utopia. Now, I end this imperfect presentation of Bruno Taut with showing you a project that was sent to me when I launched the competition, A House for Bruno Taut. And this came from an architect in Great Britain. Hannah Durham, I think I don't know, but I have a feeling she studied at Bartlett. She sent a very sensitive, very fine, complex and sophisticated project, and you are going to see it. And it's actually inspired by Alpine Architecture, the book published, made and published by Bruno Taut. These are pages from her project. This is her tower. She proposed a tower. This is the tower she imagined. And yeah, it is in an alpine landscape. Here is the portrait of, you know, a collage with also the portrait of Bruno Taut. You see written at the bottom, Taut House interior. And this is the conceptualization of the tower. Since Bruno Taut was so much against our concept, you know, how else to describe it? You know, look what she did here. She employed the upside down version of the glass roofing of the glass pavilion. But the tower is very interesting, and also look at the plans. They are all different. She really worked for this tower. You know, she tried to you know, there are also references probably to also his proposal for the Chicago Tribune Tower. She worked for this project. This is not just a sketch one does on the, you know, on a small piece of paper on the knees. You know, it's, and the feminization of the tower I like very much. You know, the bringing fluidity. Unfortunately, because I don't know, I couldn't read what she wrote, but it's why she chose to do a tower and not just a little house, and very, in a way, feminine tower. You know, fluid. Here it is. This is how in other schools of architecture, I'm talking now to the students in architecture who are here now, do projects, you know, very, you know, philosophical and lyrical, and yes, even if I cannot avoid the word conceptual. This we saw, that's it. So sorry again, this was not my best presentation. I apologize, but I think you did see a few things.